All God's people said, Amen. The Ten Commandments, we continue our walk through them. During the last several weeks, we have talked about having no other gods. We should love God with our heart, and with our mind, and with our soul. We have talked about no idols. Those things in our life that we often give credit for the good work that God is doing, whether that is our money or our security or our popularity or ourselves. We have talked about not abusing the name of God, not just in what we say, but also in how we live. Last week we talked about keeping the Sabbath, how we are created with a need for Sabbath, a need for time to rest. It is a time to reflect upon all that God has done. It is a time to give Him glory, and it is a time to allow Him to give us rest for our souls. And today we enter into the fifth commandment: honor your father and mother, so that you will live a long time in the land that the Lord your God is going to give. Honor your father and your mother. On the surface, that seems relatively easy, relatively simple, but it is an often difficult discipline to practice. What does it mean to honor our parents? What does it mean to give them honor? Well, the first part of honor is, of course, recognition. Recognition of realizing all that they have done for you. One of the realities that I have found in my own life is it wasn't until I was a parent that I truly understood all that my parents had given and done for me. It wasn't until I was the one making those decisions, I was the one making the sacrifices for my children, that I've truly realized all that my parents had given. And so part of honoring is recognizing the sacrifices, but also recognizing the lessons and the values that they worked to instill in us. What were the priorities that we learned by their instruction and by their life? Recognizing all that they have done. I have friends who have less than ideal relationships with their parents, but at the end of the day, I remind them, even if they've made mistakes, which all parents do, even if there have been times that they have fell short of your expectations or even society's expectations, there still were moments somewhere where they got it right. There were still moments somewhere where they did the things they were supposed to do, where they gave, where they sacrificed, where they taught, where they shared, where they loved. There were still moments, and it is for those moments that we recognize that they are. Part of honor is recognition, but with recognition comes gratitude. Being thankful that there were people in your life that loved you and cared for you and made the sacrifices necessary so that you could have the things that you wanted, the things that you needed, and all of the other blessings that come with that. So when we are called to honor our father and our mother, we are called to realize that honor comes in both recognition and in gratitude. But it is also important for us to realize that in order to fully understand the magnitude of what it's calling, is we need to realize that parenting, especially for the Israelite people, was a lot like it is in the South. It takes a village. The little street in Indianola where I was raised was full of either families with children or older retired adults. So we had a street full of grandparents, which meant you could get away with nothing on my street. If you wanted to get up to some mischief, You had to leave the street because it didn't matter where you were on that street, somebody was going to see it. And by the time you made it back to your house, there would have been a telephone call, and your mom or dad would be waiting for you, knowing that this is what you had been. It didn't matter how many times we tried to hide it, how many times we tried to sneak it. There was always someone who knew exactly what had happened. Case in point, my house also, on the street where I lived, was the Little League baseball field. And one time we had had a very heavy rain, and it had washed away this huge crater underneath part of the outfield. And it was huge. It was large enough that 5 or 6 kids could sit in there and feel like that, that was our place. So several of us all gathered together, and we decided that was going to be our clubhouse. Of course, then the next week the city had to come and load it full of dirt and mess up all the fun. But until that point, that was going to be our clubhouse. And so we had this huge place, and so we went. One of the friends went home, got an old sheet. We draped it over the fence so that we could have a roof, but also so we could have some privacy. Because when you're 7 or 8, you're all about having privacy. Because you've got important business going on, and so you need your space. And so we draped it over there. Now, imagine, go with me for a moment, because most of you are already laughing, so you're already there. If you have 6 and 7-year-old boys who are in a huge dirt hole that now is covered over with an old sheet where folks can't see, do you think we were having Bible study? No, not for a moment. Now, we weren't doing anything horrible, but at some point, someone came up with the idea that if this is really going to be our space, we need a fire. Because when you're outside, you need a fire. That's part of the whole experience of being outside. Now, none of us were allowed to create fires at our house. But again, this is our space. So we were going to have a fire. And so we went about and we started collecting sticks, and then someone went home. I'm not going to name any names because I do not want to incriminate anybody, but someone went home with the bright idea that I'll get the matches. And so went home, got the matches, and came back, and there in the bottom of our hole, we had everything set up to build our campfire. And so we started lighting, and there before long we had our perfect little campfire in the big hole in the ground, all of us around it with the sheet over. Now, for those of you who are savvy with fire, fire produces what? Smoke. And when you have a sheet draped over, you kind of don't have space for the smoke to go much of anywhere. Well, that didn't quite register in our brains. And of course, we saw the smoke, but it wasn't like all of a sudden it was a huge billowing flame. It took a while for the smoke to congregate until finally it started getting hazy. Now, this is the point where smarter people would have gotten out. Again, not so smart. So we stayed in there until folks started coughing. And then finally we had the brilliant idea that, maybe this wasn't the best idea. So we flop out over, we throw the blanket off so that we can have some fresh air. Well, does anyone know here, all of you brilliant science people, what happens to fire when there's a huge rush of oxygen? And that's exactly what happened, is our sweet little campfire all of a sudden filled the entire crater with fire. Because, of course, we wanted to make sure that we had enough wood for the next 10 or 12 months. So that little hole was full of sticks and twigs, and the whole thing ignited. And there we were, coughing and sputtering, smelling like smoke, staring down, looking at this huge hole that is now a great big bonfire, wondering what we should do. Now, because again, as you can tell, we were all smarter than the average bear, what do you think our initial response was? Here we have a huge fire, so what do? We run. That's what you do. When the situation gets tough and you don't know what to do, you run. It's that flight instinct that has been kicked in. And so our flight instinct kicked in, and so we all split up, all pretending we don't know how that fire happened, we don't know where any of that stuff came from, and so we all took off and went to our respective houses. And so I come up into the driveway, because my house was only about 4 or 5 houses down from the Little League baseball field. Come up into the driveway, and there my mother is standing on the front porch looking at me. And I knew then, because there were moments of clarity in my brain, I knew then that something bad was going to happen. And just after that, I saw my dad come out of the house and get in his truck and pull out and head toward the Little League baseball field. And so I come up, and so my mother says, "So what you been doing?" Because, we do that to our children. We want them to suffer as long as possible. And so she says, "What have you been doing?" "Oh, nothing. We've just been playing." "Where you been playing?" "Oh, well, we've just been around." "Well, have you been at the ball field?" "Well, we were there at some point today." And then I had another brilliant moment where I thought, I could be the hero in this. And so I said, "Oh, Mama, there is a great big fire down at the ball field. And I don't know who started that. And I don't know where it came from. But we need to call somebody, because you need to go put that fire out, or it's going to burn up the whole town." And my mama said, "That's just where your daddy went." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Yeah, he's gone to put out the fire." And I said, "Well, I'm so glad somebody called and told y'all that fire was down there." And she says, "Well, what do you know about that fire?" And of course, my answer is nothing. Now, mind you, I've been in the smoke tent. I am covered in ashes and soot and smell it. And here I am thinking I can get away with it. "Oh, nothing." And she says, "Now, really? Because we did get a phone call from Miss Neighbors." Now, Miss Neighbors, God rest her soul, sweet, sweet little lady who had nothing to do but mind everybody else's business. And it just so happened that Miss Neighbors' house was directly across the street from where the water had rushed out that great big crater under the outfield of the fence. And she had sat there in her window and watched every moment of the day of everybody who was there and all that had happened. And that woman, though she was blind legally, somehow saw that I was the one who brought the matches. I still to this day do not know how she could see that. She could not see you standing in front of her, but she was able to see all the way across the streets to see in my hand that there was a box of matches and that I was the one who brought the matches. Needless to say, the rest of my day did not go very well. But it took a village, and we had a village on my street where everybody was always looking out. And it wasn't because they were being mean, although I certainly believe that woman was just being evil. But it wasn't because they were being mean. It wasn't because they were trying to get us in trouble. It's because they knew we were stupid. And that we needed lots of folks to help keep us alive and to help keep us on the right track. Because did I fail to mention that of the 20 some odd children who lived on my street, one was a girl. All the rest of us were boys. So yes, that street got up to some stuff. We needed all eyes out. But that communal understanding that somehow comes so naturally to us in the South is also very biblical. It's how the Israelite people understood. When God said, "Honor your mother and father," this wasn't a biological request. No, these are the people, the men and the women in your life who mother you and father you. The men and the women in your life who take care of you and nurture you and look out for you and teach you and instruct you. This is a very broad understanding of who to honor. And again, we in the South understand that. Most all of us have been blessed, and right now your mind is probably sending through pictures and images and names of those people, whether they were teachers or Sunday school teachers, or people in your church, or people on your street, or people who took an interest in you, whether it was coaches or dance teachers, but adults who took an interest in who you were, who cared about you enough to make sure that you were receiving everything that you needed, that you were taken care of, and that you were instructed in the way to go. It takes a village. And thus, when we receive this commandment to honor our mother and father, it is a commandment to honor all of those adults that God has placed in our life to love us and to shepherd us and to nurture us into being faithful disciples for Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to turn with me over to Titus, one of those little bitty books. Titus chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. Titus chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. But you must tell everyone what to do to follow the true teaching. Teach older men to be self-controlled, serious, wise, strong in faith, in love, and in patience. In the same way, teach older women to be holy in their behavior, not speaking against others or enslaved to too much wine, but teaching what is good. Then they can teach the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be wise and pure, to be good workers at home, to be kind and to yield to their husbands. Then no one will be able to criticize the teaching God gave us. In the same way, encourage young men to be wise. In every way, be an example of doing good deeds. When you teach, do it with honesty and seriousness. Speak the truth so that you cannot be criticized. Then those who are against you will be ashamed because there is nothing bad to say about us. So many times when we talk about this commandment to honor our mother and father, and then when we expand it to honor all of those adults who love us and care for us, so many times we forget that honor is just not the role of a younger generation. You know, one of the things that I've heard in all of my years in ministry is complaints, rightfully so in many cases, about the younger generation. Well, if only they would step up and do these things. If only they would take care of these things. I did my time. I served my time. I've done all of that. Now it's their turn to start filling those roles. It's universal. Choose any church, any denomination, any church that has any age on it, and you're going to hear those same things. You're going to hear those same complaints about we have a generation who doesn't understand the importance of giving. And we have a generation that doesn't understand about respect. And we have a generation that doesn't understand. And just look at these teenagers. Look at the lives that they're living. And where are the people who are supposed to be teaching them? And why aren't they living the life that we expect of them? There's all of these complaints about why someone is not doing something. There apparently was a lot of that going on in Titus's church. A lot of kind of that generational anxiety. Because the fact is it goes to the other side. Is there's younger generations, complaints about the older generation. Why won't they loosen up? Why won't they let us do things? Why won't just the list goes on and on and on and on? And so it's to that the apostle writes these words that remind us if we expect our younger generations to honor all of us who have gone before, then we have to give them something worth honoring. We can't just expect people to toe a line because we want it to. We have to give them an example worth following. And that's where our shortcoming has been. We expect younger people to step up and do what is right, but are we living lives that show them that? Are we living lives that show them the importance of faithful giving and the importance of faithful living and the importance of service? Are we living lives that show that, so it models that? Or are we just expecting them to know? We have to give them something to honor. Something more than a long list of what they're doing wrong. Because notice that. I want you to notice nowhere in any of the instructions for true living does it say anything about criticize. Nowhere in the instructions does it say anything about badger or judge. No, these are the words that it uses. It says teach. It says show. It says live. It says encourage. Give them something to honor. That's our job. To live lives that are worth the respect we want to demand because of our age or position. Because here's the reality, folks. You can demand all you want to and never receive it. But if we want to be a people who generations following us honor and generations following us cherish, then we have to live lives that demonstrate that. We have to live lives that they want to emulate. And we have to live lives that are constantly being given away by our teaching, by our loving, by our sharing. We have to live lives that are self-controlled, that are wise, that are strong in faith and in love and in patience. We have to live lives that are holy. Live lives that don't spend our joy tearing down each other. Spend lives teaching that which is good and faithful and true. The writer is very clear about that. He says, only when we have our house together can then we teach and change the generations that follow. Honor. Recognize those whose faithfulness and love and dedication have given so much. And because we recognize it, and because we live a life of gratitude, then we in turn become that next generation of people to be honored. We in turn become the next greatest generation. We in turn become faithful followers who make disciples in word and in deed. But the same is true not just for those of us who live inside this family of faith. It's an even greater truth for us in this world. We live in a world where people really don't care about what the church thinks. We live in a world where people don't want to hear us because they don't think we're relevant to their lives. We live in a world where we are so disconnected, and of course our ultimate and usual response is, I wish they would get their act together. I wish they would realize how much they need Jesus and how much they need the church. Do you know what created that disconnect? Is we didn't give them anything to honor. We didn't live lives that made them want to be better people. We didn't live lives and share words that challenged them to be a people of love and grace. We did not live lives that were worth honoring. And thus, we find ourselves alone. So it's time. It's time for us to reclaim our honor as followers of Christ and to live lives that not only are faithful in today, but who train generations to come. It's always a dangerous thing when the sermon ends with that kind of challenge because it means you're expected to do something.